It's time to raise the bar.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to talk about the two basketball players, signees that is, one on the men's side, one on the women's side, that were both named McDonald's All-Americans, which is something you always love to see. And when it comes to incoming recruited classes and things like that, we're going to talk about Jedd Fisch's play calling. It's something that we've seen our everydayers have some very strong feelings about in the comments, so we thought that we would take some time and address our feelings on the matter as well. But Lars, like I said in the opener, it's time to raise the bar, because going 6-7 in Jedd Fisch's first season, when including the bowl game, is fine. It's not, going to blow anybody away, but it's not enough to, in our opinion, to really be frustrated in a first year, especially when you lose 40 plus players and everything like that. So the question is simple. What should Washington's expectations be in 2025?
I mean, I've always been on the 10-win train. I think I'm lukewarm on the 9 plus a bowl win gets you to 10 is acceptable in Jedd's second year. Because
Sure.
Again, if you think about what the part of this is, well, we know what the schedule is. So we've run through that a couple of times, and we can do that again today if you want. But it's one of those situations where you look at the schedule and you look at it right now and say there's probably 6 or 7 wins, solid, kind of like last year. And then there's a couple others where, as long as you make the improvements necessary, defensively with Ryan Walters, Jedd takes the next step and grows as the head coach and his play calling and all that, which we'll talk about. There's 2 or 3 other wins out there that are realistic. I'm not saying we get to beat Oregon and Ohio State in the same year to get to 10 wins. I'm not necessarily saying that, because there isn't no Penn State on top of that. There isn't no Iowa really on top of that. Wisconsin is probably the Iowa in that mix, but based on the things going on in that program, I'm not necessarily as worried about that.
So I get that, where I would put it right now is the expectation, because you always want to keep the expectations high, right? I feel like we do a solid job of trying to make sure we stay in front of that on this show, where I look at it and I say 8-9 wins is probably where it needs to be happy, to be acceptable. I think 8 might be, honestly, it might be a little low. Where I look at it and I say, it's something we talked about last week, I believe it was, where there are 3 members of On Three's way too early top 10 that are going to be coming into Husky Stadium next year. It's Ohio State, that's Oregon, that's Illinois. Outside of that, I look at it and I say, yeah, there are going to be some tough road trips on the schedule. Going to the big house isn't going to be easy. They don't have a quarterback yet, so that's going to be interesting. You mentioned Wisconsin, then you got to go to Maryland, you go to Wazoo, and you go to UCLA. So a couple interesting road trips in there, a couple. Going down to UCLA might not be the most difficult thing in the world. We sit here and say that in January, but I look at all those and I say, all right, you've got a nice long winning streak going at home, and that's a really important thing. And one of the most important parts of all of this, I mentioned the home winning streak to say, Jedd Fisch has not won a road game at Washington yet. And there's a lot of good things that he's done through the transfer portal, where you look at getting Tacario Davis, you look at getting some of the linebackers that he was able to bringing in a top flight tackle in Carver Willis, getting a nice deep threat in Omari Evans. There are a lot of nice pieces on this roster to say, okay, Washington has everything it needs to take a step forward. And it's, we're going to get into it a little later, but it's now on the coaching staff to make sure that these guys are in the best position to succeed after using last year as the bridge year.
Yeah, and that's the side of it, is you have foundation. You have most of the pieces in place. It's not like, hey, we now got to expect Rasheed Evans. And let's say you take out Omari and Denzel. You don't have either one and you got to rebuild like that. Then I think it's a more of an uphill climb. But the roster, all the pieces are in place. You mentioned Tacario, and now you pair him with Ephesians Prysock. Got a couple of good safeties coming in that you and I are both high on. It's going to live and die on the offensive line. That's for real. But you just look at everything else around it, and it's like, okay, all the pieces are there for them to make another 2 or 3 win jump, maybe even a 4-win jump, depending on how things go. This isn't hey, it's 6-7, 7-6, so now we're going to be like 7-5, 8-4. It's like, okay, it's not bad that you would do that, but it almost feels sarkish where you're looking at it and saying, okay, like, are we actually going to get? I mean, every year that goes by, Kalen Board deserves more credit for what he did with those 2-year run, because I think he kind of blew some of the expectations out of the water. Where it's, hey, I'm going to go get a reclamation project quarterback, and we're going to go win 25 games in 2 years. And to me, I don't think anybody expected that. So now that you're back in that conversation of, hey, well, you competed for a national championship in the CFP era. So now you can't say, oh, well, we wonder, is Washington going to be able to be in that mix? No, you proved that you can be in that mix with even less than adequate resources than, what in 23 was pretty good, but 22 was kind of like a, guess and check sort of situation. And you just look at all the talent around it. Like, there's no reason why the expectation shouldn't be high.
Right. And you mentioned what Michael Penix was at that time. Obviously, now you have somebody who we've seen what it can be in Demond Williams. And that's a really, really important part of this, where, we've mentioned it a bunch of times already this offseason. You look at what Demond can be going forward, and it's, that guy has the potential to be one of the best quarterbacks, not just in the Big Ten, but in all of college football. And that's a really exciting thing to think about, because it raises the ceiling of this roster. Elite quarterback play wins games. We saw what Demond was able to do basically by himself in the fourth quarter of the Sun Bowl. Like, he had some help from Giles Jackson and everything like that. But with the way the offensive line played, he needed to take it upon himself to do a whole lot of different things. And he did that very, very well. We've seen it at the NFL level this year with Jaden Daniels, what he was able to do for that roster. Like, there are so many examples that you can point to of just strong quarterback play elevating rosters. And that's exactly what Demond can do for this team, which is another reason that the expectations need to be higher than, 7-8 wins, in my opinion. And they need to be in the 9 to 10 win range, because elite quarterbacks will win those games for your team. Those close games where it's, one play, like one bounce of the ball will decide the game. If you have an elite quarterback, that can sometimes mitigate luck needing to be on your side.
Yeah, and it's no slight at will, but if you think about last year, if I tell you have Demond for a full game against Rutgers and against, what was the other one?
Wazoo.
Well, I guess, Wazoo. I mean, there's a couple of those you can throw in there. But both of those games not wins if Demond's not the quarterback. And that's not just because of Will Rogers, but I think there's just a different dynamic ability. And then you added a few other things, his deep ball accuracy, all those sorts of things. When you look at 2 or 3 games last season, those 6 wins going to turn into 8 or 9. And that's why we're so high on this team. That's why we're so optimistic and setting the bar so high. If you had, let's run it back and say, I'm trying to think. Let's say, take out Demond. Say you had Shaker Kendall, and then the 2 freshmen, and then maybe you bring in like a JUCO transfer. Then yes, all these, you take out one piece here, one piece there, it's a lot lower. But this is why Jedd went and got Demond last season and didn't let him stay at Arizona for a year and then say, okay, well, now that Will's gone, come in and be our guy. No, that's why Jedd was like, hey, if I'm going to Washington, this is a Diomande and Jedd package deal along with other players. But it was why Jedd played him in all 12 games, because you look at it and say, well, got him in 2-minute, 4-minute, first half, second half, end the game, start a game, whatever you want to do. So now that Jedd can say, we have game tape, multiple game tapes at least, of every single scenario that Demond is going to be asked to be in. And then you throw in, oh, by the way, he played in the whiteout. And then he played it off. Then he played, in the bowl game. And so you add all those things together, and it would be different if, Demond had played just 4 games and only had, a little bit of game time, didn't have a ton of running room, because then now, okay, he needs more experience, he needs more opportunity. And that first September and early part of October becomes, hey, well, Demond's still learning. I don't want to hear that when we get to, week 2, week 3, and we get to the Ohio State game. Oh, well, Demond's just learning. It's like, maybe learning how to win, but he even still won a couple of games last year. So he knows how to win. It's just the team has to learn how to win together. That's the key.
Right. It's all about coming together, which the most important part of that is play calling and making sure that they're on the same page in that regard. which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than the FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet, potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official sport partner of Super Bowl 59. Lars, I don't think that there was any bigger criticism from fans, even here on the show at different points in time, than what the play calling from Jedd Fisch looked like at different points last season. And I think part of that certainly came down to the quarterback scenario and just what Jedd's playbook looks like. But you have to wonder, is that going to improve in 2025?
I mean, you have to. Amber was asking about the red zone issues at some point, apparently. So, and that's Amber Fisch's wife. When they go home, Jedd made the joke in December. He's like, my wife asks harder questions than you guys do about our red zone issues. It's like, all right, Jedd. Okay, cool. We thought we'd give you a little honeymoon year. And I guess you've been with Amber for more than your honeymoon. So, yeah, now she could ask us the tough questions. And now that's what we're going to do this year because you have Diomande. And Jedd's whole thing last year was, well, we get 85% of the playbook for Will, 100% for Diomande. And it's not that they were restricting Will. It was just based on the two skill sets. It's real. Like when we go to the gym, we're doing different workouts. We're both going to the gym. Both can do things. Both can shoot a basketball. Maybe one of us is a stretch three and one of us is a point guard. You know, those sorts of things where you just kind of have to work with what the skills that you got. You go and get Omari Evans to be, as you mentioned, the field stretcher. Pair him with Denzel. You got a big, gigantic ice cream cone coming down in Jonah. And then you add Adam Muhammad, et cetera, et cetera. And so all the pieces are there for Jedd to not have any excuses. But the problem, I think, that Jedd, and this is more of a Jedd probably gets back even to Arizona. This is what Jake Dickert alluded to after the Apple Cup, which is Jedd's the smartest guy in the room and sometimes almost too smart. In the sense of I don't want to say overthinks it, but it's almost like, hey, it's the Giles play. It's, hey, we're gonna call zone read into the or speed option into the boundary. Again, good call with Jonah, bad call with Will, bad call into the boundary. And especially when you find out, hey, Giles, the guy who had, 120 yards already on the day, like, hey, we were going to go to him. And knowing Giles, he probably does a rub route and goes for a wheel route and does whatever. And maybe they win that game. And so it's just, there's always the cliche of, well, you did this, you didn't do this. You did this, you didn't do this. And it's okay. But I think Jedd knows what he's got. He knows the identity that he wants to have in this team. He's just got to have the confidence to call it. And I think having Diomande gives him that confidence.
I was going to say, I don't think it's a lack of confidence on his part. I think it's a matter of knowing the personnel. And in a sense, there's a little bit of a grace period that was needed in terms of, he's bringing in so many new guys and also trying to formulate a very different offense than every other one he's run at the college level during his time as head coach, let's say, where he was used to having somebody in the Jaden Delore no feed mold during his time at Arizona. And then he has to transition to Will Rogers, who's more of the just straight drop back passer. So there's a little bit of, I don't want it because it's not even grace. It's as the head coach, as somebody who's making $7.5 million, it's your job to make sure that the offense fits your quarterback. But the reason that we say it's a little bit different is he had 8 months to not only do that, but to also have to build an entire roster, gel it, and especially when you think about the most important thing for your quarterback, which is a strong offensive line, you needed to rebuild that as well. So there were a lot of moving parts where it's okay. You understand why it might not have been there, but even in scenarios where it's end of game, it's things where I look at the play call to end the Sun Bowl. I do not disagree with Jedd going for 2 in that scenario. I want to make that clear first and foremost. But you called the same play. Like it was basically the same play that you just scored on right before. So, and I kind of understand that as well, where it's, the defense is certainly going to be keying in on Giles. He's got 4 touchdowns. I understand that. I don't disagree with that either. But it's something where if that's the first time you do that all season, it's, that's a little odd, but it takes you back to some play calling at Rutgers. It takes you back to the Wazoo game. And it's okay. There are a lot of things here that still need to be sorted out. And I firmly am in the camp of, with time, those things will get better, and that those things will continue to improve with Diomande, with a little bit of just some different personnel, a stronger offensive line, that these are all things that will continue to improve, where I think that it's just really only the right way to go from here is the offensive line certainly hampered play calling at times, where it's, that especially with Will back there, you don't have a lot of time. He's not the most mobile guy. He's not going to be able to get out and make a play with his legs as nearly as frequently as Diomande is able to. So it feels like it kind of puts you in a box as a play caller at a certain point. So with an improved offensive line, I feel like that's the most logical way to go from here.
Yeah, I mean, it's that gif of Jedd at the end of the game when the 2-point conversion is unsuccessful, and you just see that.
Yeah,
that reaction, like that's what happened when Matt McCree left against Iowa. When he went down against Iowa, that was the reaction of Jedd's soul just leaving his body. Like, yeah, well, here goes the offensive line. It wasn't just solely dependent on Max, but I think you and I both know there was a significant decrease after Max went out, and so Max now being back, and you can call, then you have Carver and how Drew fits in that equation, so be it, and all those sorts of things. Again, you're going into this season, and even in spring ball, already how much 2x 3x better than last season than where you were at this point. Like
are you talking about the offensive line in particular, or just play call?
No, the offensive line, just the offensive line in particular.
So I want to wait and see. And it's a conversation that we're actually, a little teaser for the Everydayers out here. Stay tuned for the Wednesday show, where I firmly believe that we still need to see improvements on the offensive line, where I want to see these guys gel together. I want to see some of these guys, with another year in the offseason. And I'm very curious to see how much this coaching staff trusts their development along the offensive line. I think that's a really key part of this. So I'm not in the camp of saying it's going to be 2x, it's going to be 3x better, but it needs to just be a little better. Is kind of the thing here, where that is going to greatly improve so much of what you can do, not just in the passing game, but in the running game as well.
Do you think the pieces are there, or do you think they still need to add one? And again, I'm not taking down the whole road, because again, what I'm getting at is, if it can be 2x better as an offensive line, that takes Diomonde's sack total from, let's say, 15, 20 down to like 10 or 5. Like,
sure.
Can you make those sorts of incremental increases, because that will allow Jedd to, because part of this is not just Jedd's play calling, this is the execution, so that you can have the ability to, snowball effect and have play calling, because Jedd, that seems to be a lot of Jedd's theme, shall we say, for lack of a better word, where he seems to be talking 2 or 3 plays ahead. Where I remember the Penn State game where I asked him, hey, you didn't get Diomande in the game at all. He's like, well, we were going to do this, and then we were going to go for it on 4th, and then we had a -5-yard loss on 3rd down, so that kind of changed the trajectory a little bit. And it's just kind of like, look, can we just call one play at a time? But again, the way that Jedd's offense works is almost predicated upon building upon himself.
Right, but that's like part of that is not just a scheme thing, it's a script thing, where every coach wants to script the first 10, 15 plays of a game, wherever it is. So it's, all right, I know what, like, these guys know what's coming. It's easier for them to get into a rhythm. It's different things like that. But because it all comes back to the offensive line at the end of the day, where you look at, like, you bring up the Penn State game. You weren't able to get anything done because Abdul Carter was in the backfield the entire game. Like, there are different, and obviously that's, an elite talent. There's going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. But I bring up that example because it just makes everything so much harder, because it makes Diomonde's life harder. We saw how hard it was for UW to run the ball in the Sun Bowl. Like, that's the game I want to bring up as a much better example, because that's what this team I say can be, because we saw a really competitive team offensively. We're going to see improvements on defense, and we're going to see some improvements on offense in the running game as well, where Jonah Coleman ran for 1,000 yards last year. And if he gets a similar volume, I absolutely believe he can do that again. But the most important just thing that can happen is for him to get clear lanes to run through, so he's not having to bounce off, contact 1-2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, or just right back when he gets back to it. Like, those are the things that you really need to improve, because those are the things that are going to open up the play calling the most. Those are the things where, we know what kind of threat Jonah is. The entire Big Ten knows. They saw it. They saw what he could do, even in the scenario with a below average offensive line. So those are the things that, if those can improve, that's what's really going to help everything else take a step forward.
Yeah, and I think my point. I agree with you that I'm gonna wait to see it, but I think they did enough in terms of getting more pieces in place to make it go. I think that's again, we got to see the progression from some of the young guys. We got to see how Carver pitched in and all those sorts of things. But I think they didn't at least do nothing. They didn't say, hey, you know what, we're just gonna run it back, and this time it's Diomonde's turn, see if he can fix it. And to their credit, they put pieces around it, but it's also imperative on Diomande to say, okay, now I actually have to level up my game because, yeah, whatever Wills did or didn't do doesn't matter. I now have to say, hey, this is what I did last year. I need to do better this year and do better after that. And then we can see if we want to go to the NFL.
Well, and that also just kind of takes us back to the conversation about the expectations. Is Diomonde's ceiling and everything he brings to the table is what helps everything level up around him. And now it's just a matter of, that's why we want to discuss play calling, because all in all, if you are able to maximize Diomonde's potential, you're able to take this team a long way. And Lars, speaking of people that are able to take things a long way, having 2 McDonald's All-Americans is a really nice win for this program. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matched with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, and everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available TurboTax Live, full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So, Lars, on Monday, the McDonald's All-American rosters were announced, and Washington has 2 nominees, one on the men's side, one on the women's side. On the men's side, it's 4-star forward Niko Bundalo, and on the women's side, it's 5-star forward Brynn McGaughy. Which one do you want to start with here?
There's no question we start with the 5-star. We start with the 5-star because that was one thing, aside from the obvious ranking, no shot at Niko on that one. It's just, come on, 5 is greater than 4. We start with the greater. And
an in-state 5-star.
And ladies first. Let's be real here. But also, with that being said, no, when you look at what Tina Langley's been able to do with the women's basketball program, she got a couple of good 4-stars last year. But Brynn was the one where I think, hey, I know she's in Colfax. For people that want to know where Colfax is, Norman, do you know where Colfax is? Could you point Colfax to me on a map?
No, I couldn't.
Okay, I will give you a history lesson. Never drive if you drive to the Apple Cup. There's an airport before Colfax, so that's near Colfax. Drive that way because Colfax is a speed trap. For everybody on the east side of the state going to Pullman, it's a speed trap. The population like 200, I swear. It's a tiny, very and there's a bunch of wheat fields around it. And the reason why I say that is it's an insane person, but beyond that, it's not just in your backyard. It's not like in Rainier Beach or some of the men's basketball stars where they come from Garfield and Seattle Prep and all those sorts of things, but it's right in your backyard. You got to go across the state, and you had to beat out North Carolina, Duke, Iowa. There was a number of other women's blue blood programs that were vying for her services. And the fact that Tina, I mean, not that she hasn't done anything at Washington, but it's not like she's got a couple of tournament runs. She's not Kim Mulkey or anything like that. Dawn Staley, the other prominent women's basketball coaches, but she's building in that regard. And actually, it's funny. Who has more Big Ten road wins? Jedd Fisch, Danny Sprinkle, Tina Langley.
Tina Langley. Yeah.
Because she's the only one that does. And that's hilarious.
No, absolutely. But I love your point on recruiting, because this is the most important thing about that right now, where the women's basketball team is in a better spot than the men's team is as of this moment. And a lot of that is because Tina Langley has done a really good job building this program. Now we'll get to Danny Sprinkle, because we do firmly believe that he can do the exact same thing. And getting Brynn in this class is such a important part of all of that, because it is a top 10 class on the women's side, which is really great to see. And it's headlined by that in-state talent, which is, always, especially on the basketball court from the state of Washington, as you just referenced, Lars, exactly what you want. And they're in a good spot right now, where I know that loss to Iowa was a bummer because they were right there on the bubble for the NCAA tournament. So they're a little bit farther back than you'd like to be at this point in time, but it just shows that this team is headed in the right direction. And especially, after the whole, just after the Kelsey Plum era, there were some dark days, and now seeing that program start to build back up is really nice to see. But speaking of building back up, Lars, it has been a tough stretch for Danny Sprinkle, to say the least. And, 6 straight losses. But getting Niko Bundalo was such a nice win when he committed back in November. And now seeing him be named a McDonald's All-American, this is the second straight season for a men's player, with Zoom Diallo going last year, another prolific prep guy. But the second straight season for a men's player from, there was a Washington signee to go to the McDonald's All-American game. And Niko is the kind of guy that can really change everything for Danny Sprinkle's roster on the men's side, where it's not just him, it's the other guys he's bringing in. It's JJ Mandequit, it's Cortland Muldrew, it's getting Matt Traore from junior college, who's the number 2 ranked junior college player right now. So Danny, I think it's a great sign that Danny is not only able to get this top end talent, it's the fact that he's able to get it from all over the country, from high school, from junior college. And once it all gels, because we haven't really seen that just yet, they're starting to make steps in the right direction. Hopefully it's not too little too late, but you're starting to see that. And just Niko is right now the epitome of what Danny wants to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what Danny said on January 14th. When he's like, look, the roster that we had in Montana State and the toughness and all those guys, we don't have that right now, for whatever reason. And, when Danny was like, we got to recruit to get it like that. I'm like, well, to be fair, you did recruit this roster. But what his point being is on an annual basis. And the other side of it is, and I'm glad you touched on it, doing it from the high school ranks. Because those are guys that you ideally want to have 2 years, maybe more with. We'll just conservatively say 2, because basketball, I don't think they're one and done guys, but usually you have a 2 and done, maybe a 3 and done type of guy. But you're getting better every year, and you look at the number of high school signees that Sprinkle's bringing in, like that's why he's doing it that way versus going in the portal. Because high school guys you can kind of mold, where we saw him mold Great Osterboard, Montana State, take him to Utah State. I know it hasn't been perfect this past season, but you've seen Danny Sprinkle in the past where with high school guys specifically, he seems to have that kind of trended trajectory of, hey, freshman year, you're going to do this, where we're seeing Zoom, be a good ball handler, get some good points, get some good minutes, get some starts, not shoving DJ and those guys off to the bench and saying, hey, you're not going to touch the ball at all, and Zoom's getting 35 minutes. But this is one of the future faces of our program, and we're going to pair him with, as you mentioned, Cortland Muldrew and JJ Mandequit in the backcourt. And I think that's why Niko is honestly so intriguing, because Niko's a forward, but he's like a stretch 3-4. Like, I don't necessarily think he's a true forward. I'm not saying he can't be, but you just look at the way Danny Sprinkle's system is run. He really reminds me more of that, maybe what Dominique Diomande can turn into. And that's the other side of the question. Like, man, if he ends up coming back next year and you got Dominic on one side and Niko on the other, and then you got a guard, there's so many more things that Danny can do. So you're seeing the fruits come to fruition on the court to a degree this year, but the recruiting on of it, that's where I'm really intrigued to see how do these guys mesh next year. And again, that's the other problem. You got to get them in a mesh. They're not just going to say, hey, we're going to sign and now you're going to have an instantly strike lightning in a bottle. But I do think Danny seems to kind of have better success with some of those younger guys that he can mold a little easier.
So absolutely. And as as we kind of start to wind down here, there are 2 more things we wanted to make sure we mentioned. One of them is somebody you already brought up, and that's Dominique Diomande, which is we sent out that note to our insiders the other day from the game on Friday against UCLA, is that he was dressed, and it looks like he's getting closer to playing. We're not totally sure what the plan is right now with what his future is going to be, but with Washington not playing till Saturday at Minnesota, we might see him a little bit down the stretch here, which is something to keep an eye on. And I think that he's not necessarily, and Danny said as much, he said, hey, I don't want to put all these unfair expectations around him, because, at the last time we mentioned him, he hadn't even seen him practice yet. So it was, hey, we want to pump the brakes a little bit. We love him. We love what he can do, but I need to see more before I can say, all right, this is how I feel about him. This is what I want him to do. Those different sorts of things. So I think we need to start there. Do you have any sort of expectations for him as we get into the month of February?
And so when you think about Dominic being able to get, whether it's one game, I mean, ideally you want more than one, but let's say they have 10 games left. If he gets into half, that's good enough for me, because that allows him to get his feet wet on American soil, get used to playing with, and I guarantee you when he comes in, he's going to be playing with Zoom and guys that are potentially coming back next season, because why would you bring him in a game? Like, if you're not going to bring him in against Purdue to, make a statement and make a big splash, why put him in a situation where he's playing with guys who are not necessarily going to be there next year? Now, this is also not a ton of guys are coming back next year, so that's an interesting thing to work. But I think he's going to find a way to get him in a handful of games this year.
Right. you're talking about guys like Zoom Diallo, Jace Butler, Christian King, Tyler Harris, like those sort of players. And it's interesting to see how he's going to fit alongside him, where, as we know, his thing is slashing. It's a two-way player. It's somebody who can play defense. The 3-point shot is just, it's not there yet. So it's just going to be really curious to see how he fits with the rest of the offense. But then the last thing that you and I wanted to mention were, building for next year, since that's just kind of the theme of this segment overall, is one thing Danny Sprinkle said after the UCLA game that was really interesting, is that they're considering applying for a redshirt, for a medical redshirt for Franck Kepnang, which would really change a lot of things if he was able to come back for another year and be healthy.
I wonder if they would do that for Chris Conway too. Like that would have been the guy that I was expecting that he would have said it for.
That's certainly already in the plan, though. But no, sorry, that's definitely already the plan, where Danny has gone as far as to say, yeah, we don't expect to see him all year. So I think that they already kind of know that one is coming, because he was asked about Franck Kepnang, and just to give a little background for the Everydayers, he was asked about Franck Kepnang and just his injury history. He said, yeah, we're really hoping we can apply for a red shirt, and he just said that's the plan right now.
Which is interesting, because the way Danny been talking about it, not that he was like bagging him or anything like that, but he was just like, hey, he's been cleared for like a month and a couple of weeks now. He's been cleared for a while, and he finally gets back against UCLA. And I just wonder, because again, and Frank, if Frank does end up coming back, that would be a massive addition. But I think at the same point, we got to view it in the light of, hey, that could be massive. But that's why you go and get a Matty Traore. That's why you go and get, X, Y, and Z guys around him. So that way you're not just saying, hey, and also worth noting, NCAA rosters are expanding. Basketball rosters are expanding next year as well. So you could have Frank as your third center and say, you know what, hey, if he ends up playing 20 games, great. But it's because I say 20 because he hasn't played more than 10 in his career.
Well, it's also just kind of a building depth thing, which, Sprinkle, he said after the Oregon game, is something that he is just having trouble with right now, where a lot of Big Ten programs have 5-6 big men to rotate through. And for the majority of the season, Washington has had 2 true big men. That's Great Osborne, Wilhelm Breidenbach. So getting Matty in the mix, getting Chris Conway in the mix, having Casey Ibekwe hopefully be a bigger part of things. There are a lot of things that he can do to just continue to build moving forward. And it's going to be really interesting to watch. And Lars, one of the best places for all the Everydayers to do that, and all the other just updates that are coming out around UW on a daily basis right here on Locked On Huskies. And make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so as we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.